TamarYonahradiointerviewpart1.wmv.
The Tamar Yonah Show.
Courage.
Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go.
Audacity.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל.
History. Miracle. Hope.
No more bloodshed. Shalom. Salam forever.
Israel.
Broadcasting from Bethel, just north of Jerusalem, D.C. That's right, Jerusalem, David's capital. King David's capital. King David's capital. And now, Tamar Yonah.
All right, I am holding in my hands a book called The Shepherd King Foundation Stone. It's the first part of a trilogy. I believe it's going to be a trilogy. There's going to be books written after this. This is the first book out by the author. And we're going to be having him on in a moment. But this book is about King David and going back before that, his great grandmother, Ruth. For anyone who's not familiar with the chronology and the genealogy of David, he stems from Ruth, the Moabite, who was a righteous convert to the Jewish people. And he goes into the story and gives a biblical story to us that has that brings us back to the past so we can experience it through the eyes of the people that we read about in the Bible. And I wanted to read you something here because one of the things that most surprised me and impressed me of the book was when he was writing about Orpah. Do we have line one? Yes, okay. So Orpah, for anyone who doesn't know, was the sister of Ruth. And she was also the sister-in-law of Ruth at the same time because both of them married the sons of Naomi, who left Bethlehem and went to Moab with her husband and her two sons. And as we know the story, we understand that her Naomi's husband died, and then Ruth's husband and Orpah's husbands all died as well. They quickly lost everything, their livelihood there. And Naomi says that she's ruined and she has to go back to her people. And she says goodbye to her sister-in-laws. And Orpah goes, but Ruth clings to her mother-in-law, Naomi. Now, the interesting thing about this book, in the beginning at least of the book, one of the interesting things, because there's many interesting things here, was Orpah and how she describes coming to the Philistine cities. Now, remember that in the Gaza area today along the coast of Israel, that's where the Philistine camps were. That's where the story of Samson and Goliath, Shimshon HaGibor, Samson, took place, and he brought down the pillars of the temple of Dagon and brought it smashing down. And you know, when we read the Bible, if you're a holy person, if you're a religious person, if you're somebody who wants to cling to God and holiness, it's kind of obvious to you that the Philistines were a culture that nobody would want to join. They were like inferior. But when you're reading it as he's describing it, as it took place, it's kind of like the West today, where you see the glitz and the glamour of Hollywood, and it's very attractive. And someone who's not trying to cling to holiness will be compelled to perhaps join that culture because they see, wow, it's amazing. And he writes here that on Orpah's way to the Philistine cities, he writes here, Orpah's breath caught as the wagon approached the city. It was magnificent, the Philistine city. She practically giggled that it was so pretty. He was talking about how they were one of the rising cultures after Egypt had kind of gone down. The Philistine culture, they were very good in the arts, and they were very good in architecture, and they were selling their wares and trade all around Asia, and they were going up in culture and in importance. And we're trying to see now this through her eyes. And I'm going to get to the author in just a moment, but I really want you to come away with some of the text of this book so you can understand that it is a very interesting biblical novel to read. She has a very hedonistic night of liberation that we're going to talk about with the Philistine soldiers, and she goes back with them to the Philistine cities on the Gaza coast there. And let me just read you. It says here, she was continually distracted by new discoveries that she noticed in her host's appearance, who was taking her to the Philistine capital, from the smoothness of his jawline, because everybody pretty much had beards in those days, yet the Philistines shaved, and they had smooth skin faces. She saw the touch of makeup around his eyes from the oil in his hair or the ornamentation of his clothing. I'm going to skip here. And they're having a debate here about which culture is better, the Ivrim, the Hebrews, or the Philistines. And her host is telling her, these Ivrim, these Hebrews. He nearly spat the word in disgust, using the pejorative term for the nation of Israel. He says these Ivrim are the single greatest impediment to the advancement of human civilization. Does it sound familiar, folks? Kind of like the New World Order, and all of the people who believe in God are slowing the enlightened people down. He continues here, they not only allow, but revel in the unfettered growth of their beards like some kind of beast of the field, while at the same time cruelly blemish the most precious organ of their children before they are even old enough to protest. He's talking about circumcision. And she says to him, after living with the Jewish people and knowing what it was like to be with holy people, she says, but that is a sign of their covenant with their God. Orpah was truly intrigued by this new subject. She also noticed with some surprise that she referred to the Holy One of Israel as their God now. Her divorce from her husband and his people was complete. And he answers her, what God worthy of the name would need a mortal to complete his creation, he argues with her. He says, surely the gods require their due, but have you heard of any other god asking his followers to disfigure themselves? I heard it renders these Ivrim incapable of enjoying that most beautiful of pleasures. But, Orpah protested, there are gods that demand child sacrifice. That's not more severe. And he says to her, arguing whether it's better child sacrifice or circumcision, he says, is there a greater cruelty than making a creature live a lifetime disfigured and crippled, and not just one child or two, but a whole people? Besides, the God of these Ivrim, these Hebrews, demands such austerity. How can one unite with the infinite without tapping in to the forces that dwell within? In other words, hedonistic pleasures. And I'd like to welcome to the show now the author of this book, very interesting, Dee Avram. Thank you for waiting and for being with us, but I really wanted to read your words to the listeners. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Shalom.
All right, so what gave you the idea to write this book, to write a biblical novel? It's a daring thing to do.
Well, yeah, I love David, and I saw that a lot of, especially the youth of America, have heroes that aren't on the caliber of David, right? And so I thought, who's a better hero than King David? And so I started working on it, and I also tell my children a lot of stories around the Shabbat table, and especially on David and Goliath. And so it grew out of that. I do a lot of writing anyway, and so I decided that I would try my hand at putting the Tanakh into a language to show people a lot of what you were talking about. The Philistines were considered the highest culture. The archaeological evidence today suggests that they were connoisseurs of dog meat and wine, which was considered a high thing. They would follow after the Egyptians in their manner and dress and a lot of different cultural things, which was considered the America of its time, the cultural center. I don't know if America is the cultural center of our world, but